Good afternoon and welcome to track 3. My name is Olli. I'm glad to see you all here. Thanks for coming. And I would also like to thank our Czech colleagues for their great cooperation and also our Czech main hosting partners who are, for example, offering the party at La Fabrica tonight. Hope to see you there also. For the next 40 minutes, we'll talk about war journalism in this era where the whole media space is crowded with valid information, but also with fake news and propaganda. This is a time when social media can take us to the front line in real time, and the sources have multiplied during the last 20 years. If the first Vietnam War was the first TV war, and the first Gulf War was the first live TV war, the war in Ukraine could probably be called media-wise as the first social media war. This war is a massive tragedy, and the amount of human suffering in Ukraine is beyond words. So the world must know what is going on, and I have an honor to introduce two wonderful professionals, Filip Nerad, who is head of the foreign news desk at Czech Radio and closely working with awarded Czech war journalist Martin Dorazin. Martin Dorazin was one of the first journalists in Ukraine when Russia made the unprovoked attack over a year ago. We'll later have a brief video from Martin. At the moment, he must be in Ukraine and can't be here today. The other live speaker in this session is Russian journalist and co-founder of independent iStories, Mr. Roman Anin. Roman Anin faces 6 years in prison if he returns to Russia because of his commitment to publishing the truth about what's going on in the Kremlin with Putin and his thugs. Anin and his editorial staff have fled Russia because they are declared foreign agents in there. The Kremlin wants them to shut up, but they won't. Please welcome our first speaker, Filip Nerad.
Thank you, Olli, and good afternoon. As Olli said, originally Martin Dorazin should stand on this stage and share his experience about his war reporting. Unfortunately, he couldn't come, so you have to get by with a Brussels war veteran. But we have a short video message from Martin from Dnipro. So let's start with his message. It's a kind of introduction for the topics we will speak about later. So,
hello, dear friends and colleagues. I'm very glad to be here with you now, if only in this form. My work as a permanent correspondent for Czech Radio in Ukraine does not, unfortunately, allow me to visit my homeland very often. Nevertheless, I'm pleased that we can celebrate 100 years of Czech Radio together in this way. This is the history in which I have participated for more than 30 years. I started as a correspondent in former Yugoslavia, where I traveled for more than 7 years from beginnings of the conflict in Slovenia, Croatia, through Bosnia and Herzegovina to Kosovo and Macedonia, Serbia. Since then, a lot has changed, the technology. We have no networks, no internet. We send our reports by phones. I remember during the international isolation of Serbia, the only working phone was in the office of the former foreign minister Jovanovic, I think, and I sent from his office my reports. There was no connection in Libya at all. I sent my reports to Prague only thanks my colleagues from Al Jazeera International TV who had satellite equipment. I also covered conflicts in Israel several times where informational technology is at the highest level. This war, more precisely the Russian aggression against Ukraine, has an unprecedentedly important informational dimension. Russia has declared an informational war not only on Ukraine, but on the entire free world, on us. Some European countries are not understanding it. In this war, Moscow is attempting to destabilize our society and to push some politicians to the forefront. Therefore, in this sense, we all are at war, not only Ukrainian men and women who die on battlefields or asleep in their homes, on the streets, at the public stops, or in the workplace. The question is how journalists should behave in such a situation. Where is the boundary between objectivity and propaganda, even if the propaganda is well-intentioned? Many books, I think, and scientific papers will be written about this, but we have to solve these questions, ethic, philosophical, immediately, because editors and listeners will do not wait for us to solve these problems. I'm trying to be objective, but it doesn't mean that I'm not on the side of suffering people, suffering country, defending country. We are defending universal values which are destroyed by the Russian state. So these are, I think, values that have made our lives, quality of our lives and our work possible. And thanks these values, at least we can be here together and celebrate 100 years of such amazing institution as Czech Radio. Have a nice day and celebrate it. Thank you.
So that was Martin Dorazin, who is currently in Ukraine. Before we go to the challenges that we are facing with the war in Ukraine and reporting about it, very short preview what we as a Czech Radio did in the last year, and especially what Martin did. We sent him to the Ukraine early in January, so 1 month before the invasion, because we had a notion that something could happen there. So 1 month before, he traveled mainly through eastern Ukraine and bring stories from there. And on 24th of February, on the day of the attack, he was caught in Mariupol, in the south of Ukraine. The video you see on the edge is right from the 24th of February, and it shows how Martin and his colleagues were preparing on Russia attack, how they covered the windows, prepared their stuff for possible quick leaving, how they were prepared to sleep in corridors in between of thick walls where it might be safe. It was also time of hard decision. What is more danger, to stay in Mariupol or to leave and to be trapped by Russians? So that were the questions we were discussing. And after a few attempts, 3 days later, on 27th, Martin and his colleagues were able to escape the city and to go to Dnipro. And right after it, Russia army surrounded the city, and besiege it, and it was not possible to leave it anymore. So he was one of the last people who were able to leave the city. As I said, he based himself in Dnipro, and that's the city where he is based till nowadays. He and we choose it from the strategic reasons. It's a big city, relatively safe, even though there are and there has been some shellings, but it's relatively safe, and it's near to the eastern Ukraine, to the front lines, so he can quickly be on the side. And from Dnipro, he's been traveling all the country and bringing the stories from all over the Ukraine. So that's how the Czech radio is present on the. Is present on in Ukraine. What's the challenges and the issues we're facing with the war in Ukraine are several. The first one, which is not new, is the question of objectivity and how to bring valuable information, verified information. Our approach is to be on the ground, to be there, to be present, to bring witnesses. That's why we have Martin there, and we created him as a permanent correspondent to Ukraine. As I said, based in Dnipro. The new challenges for us is the role of war correspondent, because there's a lot of suffering in this conflict, and he's a direct witness of it. So should he stay only the passive describer or an actor? And this is one of the examples where he became an actor, because he was a direct witness of targeting of a building. He and his colleagues were starting to searching the building if there are some people in, and whether they can help. And this boundary between being only passive describer or active actor of this story is one of the challenges for it. In this case, fortunately, there was one old lady. She suffered a deep shock only. So that's the question: how to behave in his role. And in Martin's case, almost always he takes both roles. He takes a microphone or recorder in one hand and helps with the other. The second important thing with the conflict is the ethical reporting. What should we say, or what can we say? What can we show, and what not? What is too much? Because it's a lot of horrors happening there, and this is a case study for us, because these pictures are from Martin's reportage from Kharkiv about the damaged palace. And he used in this story these two sentences, which you can see here. You can see the remains of someone here, and that's all left of these body stains and hair. For us, when we decided if it's okay or not, in my opinion, it was okay, but one listener sent a complaint, and the media control body said it was wrong to speak about it during the day. And that's the decision for us and for the reporter on the ground, whether it's really too much or not, and that's what we have to wait also with this war and reporting about it. And there is a of course, many more horrible horrors happening there that we also have to cover. This one is from exhuming bodies from mass graves in Izium. I will let you hear a short
Právě exhumovali jedno z těl přede mnou. Po pravé straně 4 experti v bílých kombinézách vytahují tělo zabalené do nějakého prostěradla, potřebují k tomu popruhy, aby se ty ostatky nerozlámaly úplně. Teď vidíme nohy toho člověka, na kterých jsou kalhoty nebo punčocháče a je asi si lepší nasadit masku, protože ten zápach začíná být nesnesitelný.
Could hear Martin's voice. It's very typical for him, such a calm voice describing the scene, the story, and by the way, no one complained about it. Another very important thing regarding the reporting from war zone is obviously the safety of reporter. Wearing a helmet and a bulletproof jacket is nothing new, but you have to, as a war reporter, evaluate the situation. What is safe and what is not. Martin based this evaluation mainly on experience of the local people. He is very good in coming into contact with local people to get information from them, as you can see on this picture. And so he evaluates the situation based on it. He has I would call it 5-hour theory. He said that when you stay in a war zone for 5 hours, there's a possibility of 30% that you will be hit. And after it, the longer you stay there, the bigger is the danger that you will be hit. So he tries to stay in this very dangerous situation only up to 5 hours and then to leave. And the last and maybe the most important new thing connection with this war is what Olli has mentioned in the early introduction, and that's use of social media. I would call it the first online war, and that's not my words. That's a sentence that Roman said in our great news podcast Vinohradská 12 last week, and it's totally true. And the role of social media in this war is absolutely crucial, and a war reporter has to be active on and with social media, active in a means of as a source, as a tool, because a lot of information, a lot of pictures, a lot of videos can be found there. It's really the online war, but the role for the reporter is to find the reliable information, the reliable sources, and to bring it to the listeners or to the audio. And the active role is also to be present there and to bring his stories, his pictures, his videos to other audience, not only to listeners. So you can see Martin is active on Facebook, on Twitter. We have our news web Irozhlas, where there is online stories from Ukraine, including his reportages. We had a special podcast for the first anniversary of the war, a year in the war, was called with Martin. So this online presence is also very important, but you have to follow also some rules. It's Martin always posts his tweets, his photos with some delay. Again, for the security reasons, for his own security and also for the security of people, his respondents, not to be targeted by the Russian army. So you have to find the good balance between this online reporting or real life reporting and this safety rules. These are the three main takeaways from our side regarding the reporting on war in Ukraine, and I thank you for attention, and I give word to Roman. Thank you.
Is it working? Yeah. So I'll give myself no more than 30 minutes, right? So when the war started, we, as many other Russian journalists, had this choice between two options. Either stay in Russia and stop operations, or relocate and try to continue to tell the truth to the Russian audience. Well, you might say that, you know, the choice is obvious. For us, it wasn't that obvious, and it's not that obvious for me even today, because I have never believed in this idea of a media that is working from exile. I do think that journalists have to live in the country they write about. But we decided that since the Russian state has immediately stopped blocking all the independent media outlets, it was important for us to try to continue telling the truth. And I will never forget the day when I had to rent a minivan and drive 24 hours to the border with Latvia and meet my colleagues who were running from the war. And I stayed there for 9 hours, you know, waiting for them because, you know, there was no any connection, and the state has already adopted the laws that said that if you call the war, you can be sentenced to 15 years of prison. As you probably know, in Russia there is no war, there is a special operation, and we from the beginning decided that we're not going to follow the rules, we're not going to follow the laws. So we came here to Prague because we had a lot of friends here in the human rights sector, and they helped us a lot with getting all the necessary docs so that we can continue our work. And it was the first kind of challenge for us, because we used to be a classical investigative media outlet that wrote about corruption of Putin, about secret services, organized crime. But then we realized that, well, it's stupid to continue working the same way, because these days corruption is actually our ally. The more money they steal, the less tanks they produce. So let's not be, you know, useful idiots of the Kremlin, and let's not write about corruption. Then we asked ourselves what we can do, and we decided that since our country invaded Ukraine, it's our responsibility to do as much as we can to bring justice to Ukrainians and to prevent Russia from, for instance, importing crucial components that allow them to produce missiles and tanks. So we decided to focus on two specific topics, on covering the war crimes and on covering how Russia avoids sanctions to import crucial components. And we started publishing stories that were successful, but then the next challenge came. Olli mentioned that we can't go back to Russia because we're foreign agents. Actually, you know, I'm a foreign agent, but I don't give a shit because, you know, it's the list of the problems we have these days. You know, there is already a criminal case ongoing against me, and all my reporters can be sentenced to 15 years of prison for just calling this war war. But the main problem came when they proclaimed us as an undesirable organization, which is an official status. We are the third media outlet in Russia. We were the second media outlet in Russia that was proclaimed an undesirable organization. Well, for us, it kind of doesn't change that much. By just admitting the fact that I worked for iStories, I can be sentenced to 6 years of prison, my colleagues to 4. But the major problem is that any reader who is reposting our story on Facebook or who likes our story on Twitter or in any other social media can also be sentenced to 4 years of prison. Well, that means that, you know, we realize that people, you know, are afraid to repost us, people are afraid even to read us because, you know, now we're having stories in Russia when people are sentenced just because somebody in the metro, so somebody reading a post by Azov made the picture, showed it to police, and the guy was arrested afterwards. And of course, all our media platforms were blocked. So we had to be creative in the way we kind of reached the audience in Russia. And we realized that, look, there are only two major platforms left in Russia that are still not blocked. This is Telegram and YouTube. So we said, well, okay, then let's focus on them. So why should we invent something? So we decided to focus on Telegram, which is our main news channel, and we are getting really good, views there. So on average monthly, we get like 4 or 5 million views on our Telegram. But then YouTube. And I've never been a TV reporter, nor of my colleagues. And we had to learn really fast how to do video because we realized that, this is this platform that is still available and this is the most popular platform in Russia. So we started making videos about our investigations, and we saw tremendous numbers actually in viewership. So just for instance, one video that we made about the relatives of Russian soldiers who had been killed in Ukraine was viewed by 7 million people. The other video about the atrocities of the Russian army, was viewed by 3 million people too. And there is one specific video that I wanted actually to show you so that you kind of get the idea how we investigate these war crimes and how we use social media to investigate them. And this is the story that I really love, not only because it had a direct impact. The results of these investigations, we shared them with the International Criminal Court and with Ukrainian prosecutors. And the results of this investigation are now used in the official investigation, and I'm sure that they will be used and mentioned in the Hague Court. But the reason I also love this investigation is because it combines kind of two approaches. This classical investigative approach, when the reporter comes to the place of the crime, talks to victims, talks to witnesses, collects all the data, and then the online part starts. So last year we sent our reporter to Ukraine. It was still possible because it was before the Ukrainian state have adopted visas for the Russian citizens. So unfortunately now we can't enter Ukraine. And she went to Kievsky region because we already made a couple of stories from there about the atrocities of the Russian army. And she went to a particular village where she knew where Russians killed 15 locals. And this is how the story started.
Його ніколи не знайдемо. Дуже здивувалася.
Когда Татьяна зарядила смартфон, в галерее она обнаружила фотографии российских солдат.
So this is a woman from this village, and she found the phone of a guy who actually lived in the same village, and the phone was stolen by the Russian soldiers. So they found the phone, and they looked at the phone.
Записывай. Я военнослужащий.
It's actually the second video. How do I get back to the previous one? I think this.
Записывай. Я военнослужащий войсковой части.
Ніколи не знайдемо. Дуже здивувалася.
Когда Татьяна зарядила смартфон, в галерее она обнаружила фотографии российских солдат.
Ось вони, оцей кадр. Здоровий такий, агресивний.
Важные истории установили личности военнослужащих со снимков и нашли их профили в социальных сетях. Рыжеволосый молодой человек с курительной трубкой во рту – это 21-летний Даниил Фролкин. Он родом из Алтайского края. Контракт на службу в армии Фролкин подписал 2 года назад. Служил в 64-й отдельной мотострелковой бригаде в Хабаровском крае механиком-водителем. Мы написали Даниилу во ВКонтакте, и он согласился созвонить.
And then what is important, and one of our advantages, there are not so many advantages being a Russian journalist these days, but one of the advantages is that Russians talk to us. And we got in touch with the soldier and we said, look, we're journalists, we want to talk to you, about all the things that happen in Ukraine. And it was a very lucky moment for us because the guy just came back from the front line, back to Russia. He hated everything. He wanted to quit, and he decided to talk to us. So when Katya, the reporter, she started asking questions about everything that was going on in the village, about, all the terrible crimes. And she was so surprised that the guy, really wanted to talk. He, in the beginning, wasn't that kind of sharing a lot, but he was admitting a lot of facts that we knew, were kind of horrible. So she was talking to him for a couple of days, getting all the details about everything that was going on in Andreevka. And then suddenly one day he calls back and he says...
Записывай. Я военнослужащий войсковой части 51460 гвардии ефрейтор Фролкин Даниил Андреевич. Признаюсь во всех преступлениях, которые я совершил в Андреевке, о расстреле гражданского населения, о обворовывании гражданского населения, об изъятии у них телефонов и о том, что наше командование в хуй не ставит наших бойцов всю.
There was a very powerful moment in the video because he decided to call back and he confessed to committing all the horrible crimes, including the assassination of one of the civilians in the Ukrainian village. It was actually a very difficult story for us because, on the one hand, honestly, I didn't have any sympathy to the guy. You know, he invaded Ukraine, he killed a civilian, he's the Russian soldier. On the other hand, he was a very important witness who wasn't only telling us the truth about his own crime, but also truth about the crimes of his commanders, of his colleagues, and so on and so forth. And we were talking a lot about, what is our responsibility? Are we obliged to protect him? Are we obliged to do anything? Can we save him? Because we knew that he would be prosecuted if we published the video. So, and we decided to be honest, and we told him that, look, guy, you're 23, you probably don't know what was going on in Russia for the last 20 years, but, we live in a dictatorship, and most likely we'll have a lot of problems after we publish the story. And I already talked to a number of prosecutors from the International Criminal Court and asked them whether they can provide some protection to the guy if he agrees to confess to the war crimes in the court, and they actually were ready to do that. So we were offering him a number of times to leave Russia, and we were promising him that he of course he would be sentenced, but the court would take into account that would consider his attitude and what he had told us. But he refused, and a couple of weeks ago he was sentenced. He wasn't sentenced. He got this what is called postponed sentence of 6.5 years of prison, not for killing a civilian in Ukraine, but for spreading so-called fake news. Because of course in Russia, soldiers don't kill civilians, and if somebody tells that he had done it, then it's a crime. So this is actually one of the typical examples of, I would say, great but typical story where you kind of combine different approaches, this classical investigative approach with the OSINT approach, which we all had to learn during this war. We all had to learn different techniques, how you can actually recognize faces on different pictures, and we use numerous programs to do that. We all had to learn different techniques, how you actually geolocate a picture. So we're all good at that, but without this kind of classical approach, without being present there, the story wouldn't have been possible. And that is why I love it so much, because I think that the best stories are born when you combine them. The story had a good impact. It was viewed by more than 2.2 million people, which is really good, even in Russian terms, if you take into account the population of the country. But of course, there were many people who actually didn't believe the story, and that's another challenge that we are facing because. When the war started, 80% of Russians supported it. As of December 2022, the number was smaller. It was 68%, and the number of those who opposed the war has also grown to 23%, which is of course bad, but still there is some kind of positive dynamics. But for us as Russian journalists, we constantly face this kind of hatred from our own citizens, because they think that we all lie, we work for Ukrainians, and so on and so forth. And it's really hard to break this barrier and kind of convince people that this war is horrible and that Russia is responsible for all the crimes that are committed there. But still, when we think that it's difficult every time, we kind of look at each other and we say, well, our problems are nothing in comparison with problems of people from Ukraine. And I know it for sure, because all my family comes from Ukraine, and for me, this war and my job is has suddenly become very personal. So in the way, how do you actually treat your audience that is Russian when you know how your relatives who are Ukrainians suffer? Anyways, while the war is going on, I think that our job is really important. What's going to be next, I have no idea, because I still don't believe in the idea of a media that is working from exile. But let's hope that at least we will be able to produce some more important stories that will help Ukrainians and will help us bring justice to the victims in Ukraine. And that is my 15 minutes. I was perfectly on time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roman and Filip, for important and eye-opening presentations. I guess we probably have time for one question, if you have one. Okay, I can't see any hands, but I would like to ask Roman, it's obvious, as you mentioned, that if the journalist is on the war zone, it's pretty easy to get hurt or even killed. But what about you guys? Are you afraid about your safety and for your life? Because, Kremlin has pretty evil tactics.
Well, I don't want to exaggerate the problem. In Moscow, it was way more dangerous than it's in Prague. In Moscow, secret services conducted searches in my apartment. They conducted searches in the office of ICE stories, and they were following me constantly. And we received a lot of threats. Well, when we're here, we do understand that we are not 100% safe because Vienna is nearby, and we know how many Russian spies and people from the organized crime are there. Less than in Prague. But again, we just take some really small measures. Of course, we don't disclose the location where we work. We try not to disclose the address where we live. There is some sort of danger, but it's, you can't compare it with something that we had in Russia or with something that people face in Ukraine every day.
Okay, thank you so much. Our time is up, but if you have questions to these guys, I understood that Roman is very busy and has to leave soon, but Filip will be more than happy to.
I'm just going to fly to Brussels.
Yeah, so he will gladly answer your questions later. Thank you so much for attending, and thank you, Roman and Filip.